The first time he told me he loved me, the world seemed to shift in a way that only my heart could feel, like something invisible but enormous had quietly moved into place, and even now, looking back, I can still remember every small detail of that day, every breath, every flicker of sunlight, every trembling beat of my own pulse, as if my body had secretly known long before my mind that this moment was going to change everything. I was 18 then, a little too young to pretend I understood love, but old enough to know that what I felt for him wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't a crush that would pass or a fleeting infatuation. It was something that pulled me toward him like gravity, something that made my chest ache and my thoughts linger on his face even when I was supposed to be focusing on anything else. And he was 20, with that quiet kind of confidence that wasn't about showing off but about knowing exactly who he was. The way he carried himself with this calm strength that made me feel both safe and excited in his presence, his voice low and warm like it was made to tell me secrets no one else could ever know, his eyes a shade of brown that seemed impossibly deep, like every time I looked into them I could see 1,000 stories he hadn't told me yet, and the truth is, I had been waiting for him to say those words for weeks, maybe months, though I'd never have admitted it out loud, because even though I had felt it between us, in the way his gaze lingered on me a fraction longer than it should, in the way his hand would brush against mine like it was testing fate, I knew that words carried a weight that once spoken could never be taken back, and so I held my breath in the silent hope that when they came, they would be real, unshakable, and entirely his choice. It was late summer, the kind of golden evening when the air is warm but not heavy, and the sky stretches in soft layers of pink and orange like it's trying to hold onto the day just a little longer, and we had been walking down by the old riverbank that curved behind the neighborhood, the one place where we both knew we could talk without anyone overhearing, and he was telling me about something from his childhood, some funny little memory about how he used to race his bike down the hill and pretend he was in the Tour de France, and I was laughing, not just because the story was cute, but because I loved the way his eyes lit up when he remembered things like that, how his smile was never just on his lips, but in the way his whole face softened, in the way his shoulders relaxed, and as we walked, our arms would brush from time to time, these small accidental touches that didn't feel accidental at all, like the air between us had its own will, pulling us closer, and I remember thinking, with a kind of quiet certainty, that if I could freeze time, I would have chosen that moment with him. Just the two of us, and the sound of the river moving gently beside us, the crickets starting to sing as the evening crept in. We stopped by the old wooden bench that faced the water, the one that was worn smooth from years of people sitting there to think or talk or fall in love, and he sat down first, looking out at the water like he was searching for the right words, and I sat beside him, close enough that I could feel the faint heat of his arm next to mine, and there was this silence, not an awkward silence, but the kind that feels full, like the air itself is holding its breath, and I could tell he was turning something over in his mind, maybe debating whether to say it, maybe afraid of what it might change, and I remember how the world seemed to narrow in on just that moment, the sound of the water, the faint breeze lifting strands of my hair, the way his fingers tapped against his knee like he was working up the courage, and then he turned toward me, his eyes catching the fading light, and he said my name in a way that made it sound like something precious, and for a heartbeat I didn't move, didn't even breathe, because I knew something was coming. And then, softly, like he was offering me something fragile and irreplaceable, he said, "I love you." And my heart stumbled in my chest, because hearing it out loud, in his voice, was nothing like imagining it. It was more, so much more. It was like every unspoken moment between us had just been given a name, like every lingering look, every smile, every accidental touch had been leading here. And for a second I could only stare at him, feeling this rush of warmth that made my eyes sting, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming reality of finally having the thing I'd been secretly wishing for, and I wanted to answer right away, to tell him I loved him too, but my voice caught because I was suddenly aware of how big this was, how real, and I didn't want to just say the words back like a reflex. I wanted him to feel them the way I felt them. So I reached for his hand. Slowly, my fingers slipping into his like they had been made to fit there, and I whispered, "I love you too." And the way he looked at me then, like I had just given him the entire world, is something I'll never forget, because it wasn't just happiness, it was relief, it was joy, it was 1,000 emotions all at once. And then he pulled me into him, not in a rushed or desperate way, but in this gentle, certain way that made me feel like I belonged there, like I had always belonged there. And as he held me, I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and I thought about how strange and beautiful it was that two people could be walking through the world separately and then one day find themselves right here, together, in this moment, knowing that nothing would ever be quite the same again. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, the world around us fading into a soft blur where there was only the warmth of his arms, the faint rhythm of his breath, and the gentle weight of everything unspoken between us. I could feel his hand resting against the small of my back, steady and protective, and the longer he held me, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the words we'd said. It was about everything they carried, all the trust, all the vulnerability, all the quiet promises we hadn't even made out loud yet. And I thought about how much I wanted to keep every part of this moment, to memorize the way his shirt smelled faintly of soap and sunshine, the way his jaw brushed against my hair when he tilted his head just slightly, the way our legs were angled toward each other, as if even gravity wanted us closer. Eventually we leaned back just enough to look at each other, and there was this tiny smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, the kind that says I'm happy, but also I can't believe this is real, and I knew I was wearing the same expression because it was exactly how I felt. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just studied my face like he was trying to read something in it, and then his thumb brushed gently along my cheek in this slow, tender motion that made my whole body feel warm, and he said, almost like he was thinking out loud, "I've wanted to tell you for so long," and I could hear the truth in his voice, the way it dipped just slightly when he was being completely honest, and I told him that I had known, maybe not in words, but in the way he looked at me, in the way he made space for me in his life without ever asking for anything in return. And when I said that, his eyes softened even more, and he laughed under his breath, a little shy, as if he wasn't used to someone seeing him so completely. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon now, and the first cool whispers of night air were brushing against my skin, but I didn't care because being near him was enough to keep me warm, and when he shifted slightly on the bench, so that our knees touched, I felt this quiet electricity that wasn't loud or overwhelming but steady and certain, the kind that you know will stay with you. He started talking about the first time he realized he liked me, how it had been months ago when I was sitting in the library with my hair falling over my face, and I'd been so focused on my notebook that I didn't even notice him watching me from across the room, and he thought to himself then that he could spend the rest of his life learning the way my mind worked. And I remember my heart feeling too big for my chest when he said that, because it wasn't about something shallow or fleeting. It was about wanting to know me, really know me, and that kind of wanting is rare. I told him my own story in return, about how I'd first started to suspect I felt something for him that was different, deeper. The day he'd walked me home in the rain without an umbrella and didn't seem to care that he was getting soaked. How he'd just smiled like the rain was some small price to pay for being with me. And as I said it, he squeezed my hand in this wordless way that made my throat tighten with emotion. By now the sky had gone darker, stars just starting to blink awake above us, and the streetlights in the distance cast a faint golden glow over the water. And I thought that maybe I'd never seen a night this beautiful before. Not because of the way it looked, but because of the way it felt, like every sound and color and movement was somehow in harmony with the two of us sitting there. We didn't rush to fill the silence after that, because there was something perfect about simply existing next to each other, our shoulders pressed together, our fingers intertwined, our breathing falling into the same rhythm. And it struck me then that love didn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just this, the quiet certainty of knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. At one point, he tilted his head toward me, hesitating for just a heartbeat, and then his lips brushed mine in a kiss, so gentle it felt almost like a question, and I answered it by leaning closer, my own lips moving against his in this soft, unhurried way that made everything else fade away. And I could feel the faint smile against my mouth when he realized I wasn't pulling back, and when we parted, He kept his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine, and whispered my name again, like it was the most important word he'd ever learned. We sat there until the night grew cooler, until the hum of crickets became the only soundtrack, and even when we finally stood to walk back, his hand stayed in mine the entire way, as if letting go now would somehow undo everything that had just happened. And in that moment I knew with a clarity that was almost frightening that this night would live in me forever, not just as a memory, but as the moment my heart decided where it belonged. As we walked, the night wrapped around us like a secret, the faint glow from the street lamps catching in his hair, making him look almost unreal, like he had stepped out of one of those moments you think only happen in movies, and I kept stealing glances at him, trying to memorize every detail. The way his eyes seemed darker now but still warm, the faint curve of his smile, the way his thumb brushed over my knuckles without him even seeming to realize he was doing it, as if holding my hand wasn't enough. He had to be touching me in some small, constant way. The streets were quiet, our footsteps the only sound besides the occasional rustle of leaves when the breeze moved through the trees, and I thought about how many nights before this we had walked together without knowing we were heading toward this one, how many moments had quietly built the foundation for what had just happened. And the thought made me feel both humbled and incredibly lucky, like I had stumbled into something rare that I might never deserve but would spend my whole life trying to. When we reached the corner near my house, I slowed down, not ready for the night to end, and I think he noticed because he didn't rush either, just kept our pace steady, like he was giving me time to find the courage to say what I wanted to. But instead of words, I stopped and turned toward him, and he mirrored the movement, so that we were standing face to face under the soft yellow pool of light from the lamp above, and I don't know what came over me, but I reached up and let my fingers graze the side of his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against my fingertips, and his eyes closed briefly like he was savoring the touch, and then he leaned in again, slower this time, and our lips met in a kiss that was deeper than the first, but still unhurried. The kind that says, I have time, we have time, there's no need to rush something this important. When we broke apart, he didn't step back. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine once more, his breath warm against my skin, and murmured, I meant it, and I knew exactly what he was talking about, so I smiled and whispered, I know, because there was no doubt in me anymore, no fear that this was fleeting or uncertain. We finally pulled ourselves apart, reluctantly, and when I turned toward my house, I could still feel his gaze following me, the weight of it like an invisible thread connecting us, and when I reached the door, I looked back, just once to see him standing there with his hands in his pockets, watching me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world, and I carried that image inside as I went upstairs to my room. The house was quiet, my family already asleep, and I slipped into my room with the kind of giddy care you have when you're holding something precious and fragile, closing the door softly behind me, and then I just stood there in the dark for a moment, letting it all sink in. The river, the bench, the words, his voice sang them like they'd been waiting on his tongue for months, the feel of his hand around mine, the taste of his kiss, the way the night had seemed to bend itself around us. I sat down on my bed and hugged my knees to my chest, unable to stop smiling even though my heart still felt too full, and I lay back, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything again and again like I was afraid of forgetting even the smallest detail, because I knew this was one of those nights you'd look back on years later and still feel the same flutter in your chest, the same warmth in your skin, the same quiet certainty that this was love. I thought about the way he had looked at me when I told him I loved him too, like my words had lit something inside him, and I realized I'd never felt so seen before, never felt so completely understood without having to explain anything at all. And that's when I knew that love wasn't just about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about the small things, the way his hand found mine without looking, the way he listened to me like every word mattered, the way he remembered little things I'd said weeks ago, the way he made space for me in his life without asking for anything in return. I must have stayed awake for hours, drifting between remembering and imagining, thinking about what tomorrow would be like now that the words were out in the open, now that we didn't have to hide what we felt, and I wondered if we'd walk by the river again, If he'd take my hand in front of other people without hesitation, if he'd look at me the same way in the sunlight as he had under the street lamp, and the thought made me smile so much it almost hurt. At some point, I fell asleep still wearing that smile, my dream soft and warm, filled with echoes of his voice saying I love you, and when morning came, I woke with the sunlight spilling across my pillow and that same lightness in my chest, the kind that doesn't fade just because the night has ended, because I knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning, the very first page of a story I already wanted to read forever, and maybe years from now we'll tell someone else about that night by the river, about how he was nervous and I was hopeful, about how the air was warm and the water was quiet, about how the words changed everything. But for me, I'll always remember it less as a story and more as a feeling, a moment suspended in time where the world stopped just long enough for me to hear the boy I loved say he loved me too, and nothing in my life had ever sounded more beautiful.